welcome to Talk 90s to Me, where we're burning our popcorn on top of the oven, switching on the patio lights to see our boyfriends tied up on a chair, and trying to answer a question about Friday the 13th so he doesn't get his insides on his outsides. So don't hang up. Yes, this week we're talking the fantastically daft and yet somehow still relevant movie Scream, and in particular how it saved the horror film from extinction. And here to chat ghostface costumes and roll-up garage doors is author of the brilliant horror book Screaming and Conjuring, the resurrection and unstoppable rise of the modern horror movie. It's Clark Collis. Hello, Clark.
Hello.
It's lovely to see you.
Lovely
We're
to see
going to
you.
talk Scream. I'm really
not sure what you
excited.
mean by daft. This isn't a daft movie. It is a bit daft.
It is daft.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
it is
I'm
a
going
little bit.
to get into the daftness. Okay, we're going to talk Scream. This is not something that I originally thought, oh, we should talk about this film for Talk 90s to Me. And then I went back to it and I thought, this is a work of genius. And you have a theory about it, which is a correct theory, that it kind of saved horror films in general. So I think that we should start just with the film itself and then we can talk about the theory, right? It's amazing. It has Drew Barrymore in a fantastic opening sequence that is still referred. It has a villain that is still used as a Halloween costume. It has jokes. It has meta jokes. It has gore. It has a surprise ending. And it has Courteney Cox in a yellow skirt suit. It has everything.
It does indeed have everything. And also inspired a franchise which is still
going.
Up and running. There's a new, I think it's Scream. I really should know this, having literally written a book about it, but I think it's Scream 7 is coming out in January.
I mean, it's mad. It's completely mad. Okay. But when it came out, it wasn't a huge sensation, was it? That is kind of the surprise about Scream.
It's true. I was... when it came out in 1996, I was deputy editor of a film magazine called Neon. And so I was going to see all these films. I remember seeing Jean-Claude Van Damme in Time Cop, and I remember seeing Event Horizon, Men in Black. And I don't actually remember going to see Scream. And I suspect I did not see it in the cinema because this was not a film which I recall people being very excited about in advance of it coming out. It was written by Kevin Williamson, who would go on to be a huge figure in horror and indeed is directing all these years later, the seventh Scream movie, which is coming out in January. It was directed, the original Scream, by Wes Craven, who by that point in the mid-90s was an absolute giant of horror, but was also going through one of his periodic kind of low patches. His previous movie was Vampire in Brooklyn, which was the Eddie Murphy.
I do not remember this
one. It was Eddie Murphy as a vampire in Brooklyn.
Oh, I might check it out.
Well, feel free, but no one really enjoyed it, including Wes Craven and Eddie Murphy, who kind of I think butted heads slightly over what the film was going to be about. So people weren't necessarily that excited about a new Wes Craven movie. And also, in retrospect, yes, it has a fantastic cast. But Drew Barrymore was still, at the time, mostly famous for being a child
in E.T.
And had not really starred in that many big movies since. And then you had Courteney Cox and Neve Campbell. And this is the mid-90s when TV stars were not film stars.
And they were TV
stars.
Yeah.
Courteney Cox had broken big with Friends, and Neve Campbell was on an American TV show. But that didn't mean, in terms of movies, that didn't mean anything. It was the success of Scream and Courteney Cox kind of becoming a movie star, which helped break that barrier. At the same time, you had George Clooney on ER, and he started becoming a movie star. So it was sort of Scream and the movies that George Clooney made, which slowly opened the door to TV stars becoming film stars. What's interesting about the release of Scream was that it came out in America in December 1996 and grossed $6 million at the box office, which wasn't great because it had cost quite a lot more than that. And it actually ranked fourth at the box office after Jerry Maguire, the Glenn Close live-action version of 101 Dalmatians.
I like that film.
And Beavis and Butthead Do America.
I like that film.
It's a good movie, but Beavis and Butthead Do America actually earned $20 million over its opening weekend, and Scream earned $6 million. So basically, the people involved, I mean, I spoke to a lot of the people involved, were like, well, horror is kind of, as a genre, is in a bit of a downturn. we enjoyed the experience of making this movie, but we didn't necessarily expect that it was going to be a success. And so they just went on with their lives. It was Christmas. They went to spend Christmas with their families or whatever. It earned $6 million the first weekend. The second weekend, it earns $9 million, which is very strange because even by then, studios marketed everything to that opening weekend as they do now. And it was very rare even then for the grosses to go up for the second week. The third week, it earned $10 million. So now it's on, I didn't realize I'd be doing this much math, but sorry, I've been in America too long. But that's almost $30 million. And I think it was either Matthew Lillard or Skeet Ulrich, who were also in Scream, said that after it had been in cinemas for 3 weeks, Wes Craven called them all up and said, we're going to have a celebratory dinner. And Skeet or Matthew was like, celebrating what? And it was celebrating that it had become a hit. And the other thing that's interesting is that nowadays, if that happened, everybody would know. This would have been covered intensively by the media, and Matthew Lillard or Skeet Ulrich's reps would have called them up, and they'd have been able to check it out on the internet how the film was doing. But in those days, the film was just released, and that was it, and there was no sort of like follow up media-wise. But then it became this huge hit, and by the spring of 1997, it earned $100 million at the box office.
That is mad, and it became a huge hit. So then that is word of mouth.
Yes.
People really liked it, and they were really kind of freaked out by it. I think we should talk about the actual film, and what we should talk about initially is the opening sequence, which is Drew Barrymore. She's in a lovely house by herself, and the phone rings, and she gets very, very scared. It's a very important opening sequence. But one of the reasons why it's important is, I'm sorry if you haven't seen Scream. I'm going to do a spoiler. She dies.
She does indeed.
She does die. And she was kind of the person that you were using to market the film.
Yeah.
So she was the famous person. So the idea that who you thought was the star was killed off basically after about 12 minutes of this fantastic opening sequence was kind of to indicate that anyone could die. Because there are rules in horror films which everybody refers to actually throughout the films. She shouldn't have died, but she does. And that's kind of part of the big deal about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was sort of the Psycho trick, because in Psycho, you're introduced to Janet Leigh. She's in like the first third or possibly even first half of the film. It's very much her story up to the point where she's murdered in the shower.
Sorry, love.
Yeah, which is interesting because Janet Leigh's daughter is Jamie Lee Curtis, who starred in Halloween, which was the main inspiration for when Kevin Williamson was writing Scream. Sort of Halloween was in many ways like his inspiration.
But also he wrote this script because he got scared himself, didn't he? He was staying at somebody's house in a similar... I don't think anybody phoned up and kind of basically tested him on his horror film knowledge and then murdered him. But there was a sense that he was scared in a house that was in the countryside and somebody called. And it was that as well as the Halloween thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, Kevin Williamson, like so many people, moved to LA. He wanted to become an actor, but sort of realized that perhaps screenwriting was more his thing. And then basically started house sitting for people for spare change, pretty much. So he's house sitting at a house in Los Angeles, and he's on his own, and he watches a documentary about the Gainesville Ripper, or the Gainesville Killer, who was a serial killer. And he gets very freaked out, and he begins to worry that there's somebody in the house. So he calls a friend. And while wandering around the house, with a knife, checking like under the bed, they start talking about their favorite scary movies. And that inspires this opening scene in Scream, where, as you say, Drew Barrymore's at home, she's making some popcorn, and then she gets a call from the character who fans will later know as Ghostface, who tests her on horror trivia. And indeed, at one point, and one of the important things about Scream, traditionally in horror movies, you know how in zombie films no one ever goes, well, this is like that movie.
Exactly. I was thinking that about Doctor Who.
Right.
It's like, how can you not know that's the TARDIS?
Right. There's a long story about that, but let's not get distracted by Doctor Who. But traditionally in horror films, no one would ever say, wow, this is like the horror film. But in Scream, they do nothing but say that, essentially, and they're referencing other horror films. And one of the best in-jokes in Scream is, because Wes Craven had directed the first A Nightmare on Elm Street, and then essentially left the franchise and would not direct another one for many years later. But Drew Barrymore and Ghostface start discussing the A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and one of them says, yeah, the first one was scary, but the sequels are really not very good. Which
it's
is like,
Drew that says it. That's really good.
And yes, it's this extraordinary sequence. What's interesting about the casting is that Drew Barrymore initially signed up to play Sidney Prescott, who's
like the heroine.
Who is the heroine of the piece and would be played by Neve Campbell. And I interviewed, for the book, Julie Plec, who these days is an absolutely huge figure in TV, and she co-created The Vampire Diaries, which is a massive sort of teen horror TV franchise. But in those days was Wes Craven's like assistant, basically, his intern, effectively. And she said that she can very much remember so Drew Barrymore had been signed up to play the lead, and then called up Wes and said that she wanted to play the character that gets killed, Casey, who gets killed in the first scene. And Wes, who was very much Mr. Horror, got the impression that Drew Barrymore thought that he wasn't a good enough director. He wasn't like a classy enough director for her to, quote unquote, like really star in his film. And I was like, Julie Plec's telling me this. And I'm like, and she's almost choking up and I'm almost choking up because Wes Craven is, like so many horror auteurs, is known to be an incredibly nice individual. And to have this sort of erudite, former English professor get the impression that Drew Barrymore doesn't want to star in his movie because she thinks that he's kind of not good enough for her. Whether true or not, I don't. Maybe he got the wrong end of the stick. But it's just incredibly sad. But it works out so incredibly well because you're
brilliant.
Right. Drew Barrymore is like on the poster. It's starring Drew Barrymore. She's the biggest name, and then she gets quite horribly murdered in the first 10 minutes of
tragic,
the movie.
Really. There's a really brilliant thing that I found, which is what the technique that Wes used, because she cries. Obviously, I mean, it's an intense scene, and she at a certain point she's wandering around this house with this awful person on the end of the
Mr. Ghostface,
line, Mr. Ghostface. We don't know he's Ghostface. We do by the end of the sequence, but who's basically saying, "I can see you. I've got your boyfriend. You've got to answer these questions, or everything's going to go off." And she cries, right? And she said, "Oh, we had this story that we used to just talk about," because she didn't want to use, you can use those things that you put in your eyes and then you cry. She wanted to actually cry. But this is the thing that really made me laugh. Sorry, this is terrible.
Right.
But this is the story that Wes used to say. So the story is about, it's a newspaper article of a dog being burnt by its owner who's set on fire, right? So Drew Barrymore tells Wes this story, and she starts crying when she does it. So every time he needs her to cry, he just goes over to her and goes, "I'm lighting the lighter."
No.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
Terrible. And then she cries. Yeah. I mean,
you sure you don't like horror movies?
Sorry.
You had a particular glee in your voice when you
think it's, I mean, obviously, I don't approve of anything happening to dogs, but it's just that thing that really made me laugh.
I should point out we're both a bit teary after you telling that story.
Yeah, we're both a bit upset. My dog is here. Yeah. So yeah,
fortunately asleep. Oh no!
We've woken her up now. So let's talk about like after that sequence, because as you said, one of the things that's really amazing about this film is it refers to horror films all the way through. There are little jokes in it, and there are explicit things that are mentioned, including a very famous kind of speech of one of the characters. He's called Randy, and he's like the nerd. So there's a couple of kind of hunky boys and kind of pretty girls, and then there's the nerd. And the nerd, Randy,
played by Jamie Kennedy, yeah,
he's great. And he basically tells you how horror films work. It tells the story, the audience, how horror films work and why you can never have sex in a horror film, because if you have sex, you will die.
Yeah.
If you smoke and drink, you will die. And at that moment when he's saying it, basically our heroine is having sex and everybody else is smoking and drinking. So it's like ramped up.
And also they're watching Halloween on TV, which is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
And he says, never say, "I'll be right back," because you never will be.
Yeah.
And then Matthew Lillard says, "I'll be right back," and before disappearing out the door.
I'm actually going to talk about that. But before we do that, I just want to mention the lovely story of David Arquette and Courtney Cox, because they meet on this film and then they end up dating. And within the film, they date in the film.
Yeah.
And the parallel is like obviously lovely, but also they really seem to enjoy each other's company. Like whenever they're on the screen together, it's super great.
Yeah.
I've got a quote from David Arquette as well. So basically, he plays a kind of hapless policeman who's never taken very seriously because he looks Deputy Dewey, because he's too young and everybody knows him anyway and all that kind of stuff. So he was really excited about taking this role, and he was super excited about acting opposite Courteney because he liked her already. But when he met her, she gave him some attitude, and then he thought, I know what I'll do. I'll follow her home in my car because I've got this hot rod and she'll be really impressed. But she had a Porsche. So she sets off to her house, and he's like, his plan was he was going to pull up next to her at the lights and kind of go like tip of the wing, like, yeah, check my car. But she just drives really fast, and he kind of she loses him. And he basically says, I don't know what I was thinking.
It's interesting. I think there's a quote from Courtney Cox saying, looking back on the first 3 Scream movies, and she says something like, the difference to me was that we were sort of romancing, David was romancing me in the first one. We were dating in the second. We were married in the third. I can't remember when that quote is. There's rather sad things. By the time they make Scream 4 in like 2008, that's actually when their marriage is breaking down. And so there's this awful quote from Wes Craven, who directed the first 4 Scream movies, and he said he said something like, Courtney and David were very professional on set, but we just noticed after a while that David never went home. And you're like, oh, that's really tragic.
Yeah, that is really sad. Okay, there's one more thing that there's so much in this film that I really like. Okay, but I want to also, we should mention Henry Winkler's in there as the headmaster, Mr. Hembury. There's a little bit of a reference to him being the Fonz early, because there's a little bit where he kind of like touches his hair. But there's also a point where he gets a bit scared and he's looking around the school like, why am I feeling a bit funny, quite sure why. And there is a janitor. And what does the janitor look like? The
janitor is portrayed by Wes Craven, but he is dressed as Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
Yeah, it's so good. There's so many little bits like that I just really enjoy.
Well, it's also because I guess there's a point in the movie where, because of the great writing and direction, you think that anybody could be the killer. But there's definitely a moment when you think that Henry Winkler
could be the killer.
Be the killer. Linda Blair from The Exorcist, who had worked with Wes Craven before, also turns up as, I think she's credited as like irritating TV interviewer or something.
Exactly. So, and then there's a very intense bit at the end. And when the cast talk about it, it is intense. They film that kind of final sequence, which is essentially a party in a big house that ends up kind of like spiraling in all sorts of places. And a lot of people die. Some people live, but a lot of people die. And that takes 3 weeks, and they all lose their minds, particularly Skeet and Matthew, who play Billy and Stu, and Nev, who plays Sydney. Yeah. They all lose their mind, like completely.
Yeah, it goes on and on. It was like I don't know what it was, scene 117 or whatever, but it had like 54 parts, and it just went on and on and on and on. And at the end, Skeet Ulrich's character is definitely dead, because I think Sidney Prescott shoots him in the head. And Matthew...
Courtney shoots him.
Courtney, right. And someone drops a television on Matthew Lillard's head.
That's Sydney. I love that bit.
But there's always been, for ages, because interestingly, Matthew Lillard tells a great story that they were both going for the role of Billy Loomis, who is Neve Campbell's boyfriend. But the way that Matthew Lillard tells it, Wes Craven told him that there was no way he was handsome enough to play Neve Campbell's boyfriend, and so got him to play the other killer. But one of the things that Matthew Lillard's always insisted his character might still be alive, because you never see him die. What you see is someone dropping a television on his head.
And can I just say, it's an old-fashioned telly. Yes. It's not a skinny telly.
Yes,
it's like the tellies that we used to have. It's like that big. And it's right on his head.
But he's always insisted that his character could be alive. And God knows, I mean, Scream has not been slow to sort of bring back characters one way or another. But intriguingly, Matthew Lillard is in the next Scream movie.
Why
And
would he not
we
be?
don't know what because Skeet Ulrich came back, I think, in the most recent Scream movie as a ghost, which is a bit of a cheat, really, but he is there. So we don't know, and a lot of old characters from the franchise are coming back, but we don't know whether it's Matthew Lillard as Stu Macker, his character in Scream, or some sort of.
It would be great if he came back as a ghost, but he's got the telly on his head.
Would be great.
That would be really good. I think that
would
could
be great.
happen. I think that could happen. Okay. This is an important quote. It's a bit about the kind of idea of films as well. And this is what Billy says in this scene, in the kind of big scene where everybody dies. He says, movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative. And that's the kind of... not the moral of the tale, because that's kind of weird. But like it's the point is there is no motive.
Yeah,
That's what they say. They say there is no motive. It's like one of the characters says, "Oh, it's peer pressure." The other one says, "Oh, I had a terrible childhood." It doesn't matter. There is no motive, and also you can't pin it on the kind of this generation has grown up watching telly and that's warped their minds, because that's not true either. It just makes people more creative.
But also, as so often with horror, this was reflective of something that was actually happening in the culture at the time, which was in the mid-90s. Politicians like Bob Dole, the Republican presidential candidate, pointed at horror movies and said, well, this is what is causing all the ills, of society. This is what's causing violence and mayhem. And that stretched through to, the whole of the 90s. That was a big bone of contention. And it seems almost cute now in given what kids can very easily watch on the internet, that they were, choosing, movies like Scream to really point a finger at.
I know. It's completely mad.
Yeah. But that was basically Kevin Williamson saying screw you to people that thought that horror was, was causing problems in society.
So Scream comes out. We don't think it's going to do very well. It does very well. And you've described that there has been a dip in horror. Scream comes out and basically rescues the genre. What happens? How does it do that?
Well, so it's a huge hit. I mean, it's also a hit that turns all the cast into stars. When I asked Neve Campbell what was her favorite movie, I think she said The Changeling, which is an old George C. Scott movie. And she said that was the first horror movie I ever watched and the last horror movie I ever watched, because she was not a fan. Very reluctant to sign on for Scream because she had done The Craft just beforehand, which is a tale of high school witches, and she didn't want to be labeled as a Scream queen. But this burnishes everybody's career. Like, suddenly everybody's a star. Matthew Lillard is a star, Skeet Ulrich's a star, Neve Campbell, Drew Barrymore, Courteney Cox, they're bigger stars.
Yeah.
So suddenly, everyone in Hollywood wants to be in a horror movie. And whereas they'd had difficulty casting Scream to a degree, people are lined up to appear in Scream 2, which the Weinstein brothers, it was Weinstein brothers who had produced the original Scream, immediately green light. So you've got Scream 2 coming down the track with an even starrier cast. Kevin Williamson, who wrote the script, very busy man. Even before Scream came out, he had written the script for I Know What You Did Last Summer. So that comes out almost immediately afterwards. And he is writing Scream 2. So he becomes almost a genre in his own right with these kind of teen slasher movies. You also have Urban Legends, which is a teen slasher film. You have basically 4 years of wildly successful teen slasher films. But what you also have at the same time is Hollywood's really starting to invest in the talent that had emerged from indie film in the early 90s. And you have this glorious year, 1999, where you have almost every week a new sort of modern film classic coming out, whether it's Fight Club, whether it's The Virgin Suicides, whether it's The Matrix, and on and on and on. And this also applies to horror. You have The Mummy comes out, which is an absolute blockbuster hit. That is kind of more of a family movie than an out-and-out horror film. But during that summer, in cinemas at the same time, you have The Blair Witch Project, you have The Sixth Sense. Later in the year, you have Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, yeah, I like that film.
Yeah.
Tim Burton.
Yes. You have this new company, Dark Castle Films, which starts pumping out movies, starting with The House on Haunted Hill with Jeffrey Rush. You have even Arnold Schwarzenegger making this sort of end of the millennia horror film called End of Days, in which he must stop Gabriel Byrne's Satan impregnating a woman, because then if he does so, the world will end, and so on and so forth. So you've got all of these, End of Days, not a successful movie, but you do have all these films that prove that kind of horror is both, cool and not an easy way to make money, but one of the easier ways to make money.
And then I suppose eventually what you get is just it's almost like a natural teen kind of series, isn't it? So you'll get things like Twilight or all those kind of things. It's almost seen as a stage that teenagers go through. There'll be a bit where they have to watch kind of horror-y, vampire-y, ghosty things, isn't there? Or even you could say Buffy. You?
Oh, yeah. Well, Buffy's also. Sarah Michelle Gellar. You cannot move as Sarah Michelle Gellar projects in the late 90s. She's in Buffy, Scream 2. I Know What You Did Last Summer. She's in a ton of stuff. Although what you do have then at the turn of the century, you have 4 solid years of people wanting to watch shiny-teethed, good-looking young Americans being slaughtered on screen, and then all of a sudden it's over. It's absolutely over. Scream 3 comes out in 2000, and that's a lot more expensive than the first Scream. And they have to change the script dramatically because you have the Columbine massacre in 1999, and they had Kevin Williamson had written a script that was once again set in high school, and the producers didn't want to make that. So they got someone else in to write a script which was set in Hollywood with Scream 3. And that it's still successful, but not as successful. And then sort of the switch kind of flips. And especially in a post 9/11 world, that's when you get a lot of very successful movies in the so-called torture porn subgenre. So that's when you get your Cabin Fever, your Saw, your Hostel, and that's really kind of a backlash in many ways to what had come before, because the Scream movies are very sort of poppy, they're bloody and violent, but they're also kind of fun and
I can deal with them.
Yes. But following that, you get a lot of movies to some degree about terrible things happening to folk in cellars, essentially.
Okay, I dismiss those.
That's fine. That's totally fine. This isn't Talk 2000s to me. I assume I will not be invited back to discuss,
because it's horrible.
Discuss torture porn on the subsequent podcast.
Okay, so let's look at the horror film landscape, right? Which I was not particularly familiar with because I'm not a horror film buff. But before Scream came out and was this surprise hit, the horror film as a genre was failing, wasn't it? There was an idea that it might fail completely, a bit like the kind of Hollywood musicals eventually went. They just thought, okay, it's over. Why was that?
Well, so the 80s had been a real boom for horror. There are all sorts of different horror movies released in the 80s, but the slasher phenomenon in particular had been just a huge generator of, I guess you'd call it, product for Hollywood, if the kind of product that didn't, win awards. You had a series of slasher franchises which were birthed by the original Halloween, the original Friday the 13th, and then A Nightmare on Elm Street, and also Chucky, the Charles
Chucky,
Play franchise.
I do remember him.
And so those franchises, sort of pretty much every other year, or in some cases every year, were releasing 2, 3, 4, or whatever sequel it was. And then sort of beneath those more famous franchises, you had a lot of other movies, slasher movies that frankly you've never heard of, and some of which I've never heard of. And there's some ridiculous statistic that in 1982 there was something like 87 theatrically released slasher movies in America, which is 2 a week. Not on 10,000 screens or whatever, but this was a huge business. By the time you get round to Friday the 13th Part 8, people are beginning to lose interest. And there weren't really new franchises replacing them. You did have Candyman in the early 90s. And you also had the Leprechaun movies from 1994. You haven't seen the Leprechaun movies?
I've never even heard of them.
Well, hold on to your hat. I got something for you to do this evening. Just the little detour, but the Leprechaun movie is the first one called Leprechaun. Came out in, I think, 1984. Starred Warwick Davis as the titular evil leprechaun.
Okay.
And Jennifer Aniston. Do I have your interest now, Miranda?
Maybe.
Jennifer Aniston is the female lead in her first kind of lead role. This is before Friends.
Wow, okay.
And so you have a series of Leprechaun movies, Leprechaun 1, Leprechaun 2, Leprechaun 3, Leprechaun in Space.
That one I watch.
Leprechaun, it's a lot of fun. It's a direct Aliens ripoff or
Literally
parody.
sounds like pigs in space.
It is much like that.
Okay.
But anyway, even Leprechaun is not earning the kind of money that Halloween and Friday the 13th did in their heyday. And then you have a series of films where it's sort of like series of horror movies, the big budget, big stars, sort of gothic horror movies. So you have your Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman.
I know.
Interview with a Vampire.
Can I just roll my eyes at those? I mean, I would like to roll my eyes twice at those. Those are rubbish.
I'm not going to disagree necessarily.
So, I mean, I can imagine that they kind of killed that genre off because what they are is a kind of like a kind of billowing shirt version of anything scary. I mean, I am a bit of a scaredy cat, and I wouldn't have gone to see anything that was like scary because when I was younger, I watched Poltergeist and I watched Evil Dead, and that just killed it off for me because I was so frightened.
That's great. That's what a double bill.
Yeah, I was so frightened. I was so frightened that literally the person in front of me, when the film finished, turned around and went, "Are you okay?" Because I'd screeched so much. Anyway, so I was a complete wuss. So, like, if I watched Interview with a Vampire, like, I know it's not scary. And it was rubbish, to be honest.
Well, that's the thing. And it doesn't really... And also, none of these movies go on to be franchises, basically. So horror's in a real impasse.
Plus, I'm going to say something as well.
Sure.
Plus, you've got, like, Trainspotting coming out.
Yeah.
You've got, like, Tarantino coming through. So it's a bit like the exciting... thrilling, because definitely Tarantino can be really scary.
Yeah.
Like, way of looking at films has kind of shifted a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah. You have all these hip, cool filmmakers, as you say, Tarantino, Kevin Smith, Paul Thomas Anderson, and a lot of them are kind of do have horror moments. Reservoir Dogs, someone gets their ear cut off. Pulp Fiction, Uma Thurman gets a hypodermic needle in her chest. But you couldn't really call these horror movies. So they're not really helping the genre in that extent. And in fact, what they are, as you say, what they are doing is making the genre look pretty old and creaky. So you have this weird situation where there's a horror movie magazine called Fangoria, which has been around since the late 70s, no laughing.
I like that name.
But it's like, the horror Bible. And there's an editorial from like 1994 basically complaining about the new Halloween movie, sort of saying, like, we've just got to stop making these slasher sequels, because people are becoming less and less interested. And it does seem that, and the people that made the classic horror films have somewhat fallen on hard times. John Carpenter and George Romero, who made the zombie movies, really is in development hell all through the 90s. And as I said before, Scream, Wes Craven's career was on a downturn. And this is the other reason I think why people were not that excited for Scream necessarily. Horror does seem to be on its last legs. And in 1995, I think, the top grossing horror movie was Species with Natasha Henstridge. She played an alien, mostly naked alien.
It's the 90s.
I enjoyed it at the time, not going to lie. But that grossed, I think, $30 million, which is a nice hit. But at the same time, like Independence Day was grossing $300 million in the States. So horror is, way, way, way down the box office list and does look like it could go the way of the musical, the Western, all of these other genres, which at one point had really, been Hollywood mainstays that had kind of disappeared. And then Scream comes along and really does change everything.
It's amazing, isn't it? There's also like, as a non-horror person, even then, what I kind of understood when I was kind of researching this was actually there are elements of horror in quite a lot of films. I just hadn't quite realised. So the other film that I thought was interesting towards the end of the 90s, well, there's two. One is Blair Witch Project, which is really, really scary. Yeah. And the other one is The Sixth Sense, which is also scary, but also like, twisted and whatever. And they have horror elements, but I mean, actually Blair Witch is completely horror, isn't it?
Yeah.
But The Sixth Sense maybe not so much because it's got Bruce Willis in it for a start.
Well,
But it's like those elements have kind of come back, or they're allowed back in again.
Well, it's interesting, and I don't want to start an argument, but it's always interesting to me that people who are not into horror are always very keen to say, "Oh yeah, well, Sixth Sense was a huge hit, but it's not really a horror film."
Is it not?
I'm thinking the guys. I mean, okay, spoiler alert for The Sixth Sense. Bruce Willis is dead for almost the entire length of the movie.
He's not moving around with a load of blood here,
but there are ghosts that look very nasty in that movie.
I know, but it's Bruce Willis.
A ghost story. I was listening to someone the other day saying they were talking about how 2025 has been an incredible year for horror, and they were going, yeah, this film and that film. And Sinners, if you count that as a horror film.
That is a horror film.
It's about a bunch of people being besieged by vampires. I don't know how much more horror you can be.
Poor horror. Poor horror. It's not acknowledged.
Although, so I was very lucky with the people that I got to interview for my book, but I did reach out. I don't think he'll mind me telling this story, and to hell with him if he does, but I have interviewed M. Night Shyamalan, who directed The Sixth Sense and the alien invasion movie Signs. On several occasions, he's a delightful individual. Fantastic. And I really enjoy his films, and I have no problem with him, except that when I reached out to him to see if he'd be interested in my book, I got the message back saying that M. Night Shyamalan he was a Miranda Sawyer, if you will. He said, I don't really think I make horror movies. And I'm like, I didn't say that. I'm like, The Sixth Sense is a ghost story. Signs is an alien invasion movie. The Happening, it's all the trees are trying to kill everybody. I mean, not all of his films are horror, but I'm like, come on.
So what we can say then, that is horror is never regarded as well as other films, is it? Like, it's not. I mean, we can occasionally an actor or a screenplay might be Oscar nominated.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking of Demi Moore, actually. But like it's not acknowledged, even though it's an incredibly successful kind of genre, isn't it?
Yes.
It's just, it's like comedies. Hollywood don't like it.
I guess. I mean, I don't know whether there's something you're going to ask, but people who are not into horror are always saying, why do you want to watch horror movies? But no one ever says, why do you want to watch comedies? What is it about dramas you find so interesting? Why do you want to see people sing on screen? And it's just like, well, it's just a different reaction to, it's a different side of enjoyment.
I suppose so. But I suppose what it is like, you might get scared and maybe you wouldn't like it.
Right. I mean, to take it seriously, why do people like horror? I mean, for some people, it is genuinely cathartic that they see in a safe environment things on screen that reflect their own experiences. There is a film called American Mary, directed by these twin Canadian sisters called the Sochka sisters. In American Mary, the lead actress is assaulted at a party. She's a trainee surgeon. She's assaulted at a party and then stops being a trainee surgeon and enters the strange world of body modification. So she's suddenly like performing off the books sort of acts of surgery on people that want to look different, essentially. But what you also discover at the end of the film is that she's kidnapped the bloke that assaulted her and has amputated all his limbs and keeping him in a garage.
Okay.
And I interviewed the Sochka sisters, and they were saying that every convention they go to, a woman will come up to them and say, thank you so much for making that movie. Something happened to me, and that helped me get through it. So it does have that element, definitely has an element of catharsis for a lot of people.
Yeah.
At the other end of the experience, it's a cool, if you're like 16 and, you want to, whether you're male or female, you want to get a bit handsy with somebody that is in a dark place.
Cuddling together for warmth.
Yes, cuddling together for warmth, and with someone that also wants to cuddle together for warmth. Then what better place than going to see a horror movie in a theater? I have to say, what I like about it is that I think there are people who like horror films that like the repetitiveness of it. That Friday the 13th to a certain degree is the same. The franchise is kind of the same film over and over and over again, until Jason himself goes to space with Jason X. Who among us could forget that? And I don't really, that's not really my thing. I like being totally surprised. I like that feeling in a cinema that anything can happen, which you can get in horror. I went to see Weapons, the recent smash hit. And for the first hour, basically, long story short, these kids disappear at the start of the movie. It's like, well, what happens like that?
I like that film.
But I don't know if you found this, but for the first hour, I was like, what the F is going on?
Yeah.
I have got no idea what's going on. Now, the second half, I mean, you don't really figure it out. You're sort of drip by drip. The filmmaker explains what's going on. And I still enjoyed that because it turns into more of a comedy, really. It has certainly comedic elements by the end. And so I enjoyed that. But what I really enjoyed was the first half when I'm like, this could be going anywhere. I have absolutely no idea. And that's kind of what that's what I'm always searching for in a horror movie.
What's your favorite scary movie then? Is it Scary Movie?
No, it's not Scary Movie, although it's interesting to note that Scary Movie was huge. Those Scary Movie movies, which are also now returning to cinemas,
and they're like Mickey takes
successful.
Of Scream.
Yeah.
And Scream's original title was Scary Movie.
Scream's original title was Scary Movie, and then they make a series of films called Scary Movie. And Scream, I haven't really sort of mentioned this, but Scream was produced by Dimension Films, which was Miramax's kind of sibling company. Miramax would make under Harvey Weinstein, long before, people were aware of his awful crimes. Miramax was the company that would make these not necessarily profitable, but awards-friendly films.
It's like trendy, weren't they?
Yeah. Dimension, which was the horror label, was the company that would make these films, which never won any awards, but made huge amounts of money, and then which allowed Harvey Weinstein to, finance, stuff like the Gangs of New York and so on and so forth. It was funny. I rewatched, obviously, an awful lot of films for this book, and I was surprised by how much of it stood up. I mean, Scream particularly.
Scream's great.
Absolute cracker. I'm not. The sequels are a bit mixed, but Scream itself is an absolute cracker. I like The Descent. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's basically about a group of women who go caving or spelunking, to give it its technical term.
Spelunking? That sounds a bit rude.
In the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay.
And they have sort of issues. They sort of have intra-group issues, which are explored while they're spelunking in this cave system. And it's one of those movies that if nothing sort of horror movie horrific happened, the whole thing is so terrifying as these women who are not necessarily getting along very well crawl through the tiniest cracks you can imagine in a cave system. And then after 50 minutes, monsters arrive. And the whole thing goes to a different, equally exhilarating level. And The Descent isn't it, which was actually directed by British filmmaker Neil Marshall. It's a real change your trousers thrill ride, I have to say.
Okay, that's not for me.
I think you'd like it. I do think you'd like it.
I don't know. That's spelunking. Okay, so here at Talk 90s to Me, our right hands are always red, and we use them to click on our fabulous Talk 90s to Me playlist of excellent 90s bangers, which you can find on Spotify. Clark, what's a 90s track that you would like to add to our playlist?
Well, I have to say my heart would probably say something by Primal Scream, but my head here, I think more appropriately is going to say Red Right Hand by Nick Cave, which is all over the Scream franchise.
Yeah, and it's great.
It's great. Yeah.
It really works within that context, and it's completely brilliant. Okay, so Clark, you do know a lot about horror, and luckily for those who don't, you've written this amazing book, which is called Screaming and Conjuring: The Resurrection and Unstoppable Rise of the Modern Horror Movie. It's got a great cover, I have to say. It's beautifully presented. There is a lot of work in this book, isn't there? What have you learnt?
Well, what I've learned is that sometimes it pays to give a title to a book where you sort of like imagine something's going to happen and then it actually happens. Because 2 years ago when I wrote the subhead, The Unstoppable Rise of Horror, I did think, oh no, like this, what it seemed like an unstoppable rise. I mean, that could always end. You know what I mean? There's no guarantee. When I came up with that 2 years ago, there's no guarantee that it's going to continue. But in fact, it has. And you know, to my delight, I mean, the book covers the period from the release of Scream in 1996 to the release of The Conjuring in 2013, and you know, goes through teen slasher horror, Japanese horror, and the remakes of Japanese horror, so-called torture porn, supernatural horror like Insidious and Paranormal Activity, and ultimately The Conjuring. And there is this last chapter that covers the last 10 years. But certainly, yeah, it's a real hostage to fortune saying that something's unstoppable, which could actually be stopped in the 2 years it takes to write a book and get it to the printers and then out to bookshelves. But incredibly, I mean, 2025 has been like one of the biggest years for horror ever. You've got Sinner. I know you've seen all of these, but you've got started off with The Monkey, Osgood Perkins' Monkey, which is terrific. Sinners, which was, you know, one of the biggest hits of the year. Final Destination, Bloodlines. Yeah, 28 years later, Weapons, and on and on and on. So I guess I've learned that it's okay to be a hostage for fortune, to give a hostage to fortune sometimes, if you get lucky.
That was Talk 90s to Me, featuring Clark Collis, whose wonderful book is out right now. It has an amazing cover. I'm just going to show it. Oh, Jarvis has fallen down. There you go. And it's also got that thing where the edges of the page is a coloured shiny black, which I really like. If you want more 90s music, I've written a book called Uncommon People, Britpop and Beyond in 20 songs. Yes, it's still out there, people, so why not invest? Subscribe to Talk 90s to Me on your podcast app, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky, and look out for new stuff that we'll be announcing with the joy of a man wielding a machete in a strange mask. See you next time.